Last week we talked about the need for a culture of safety in the coal mines. Tonight we'll talk about the regulation of mine safety by the government, right now on the Law Works.
From West Virginia Public Broadcasting.
The Law Works is made possible by the generous support of the West Virginia State Bar, the Monongalia County Bar Association, and by a major grant from the West Virginia Bar Foundation, promoting public knowledge of the law in West Virginia. The West Virginia Bar Foundation, the philanthropic organization for West Virginia's legal profession and justice system.
What can the government, both state and federal, do to ensure coal mine safety? My guest is WVU law professor Pat McGinley. All right, let's talk about the government's role in mine safety. We've talked about the culture of mine safety and the necessity of having a buy-in from all of the players, the rank and file miner up through the mine operator. But in the aftermath of the Upper Big Branch disaster, there were stories that said things like the CEO of Massey Energy, the company that operated Upper Big Branch, was saying things like, if there are complaints about safety here, or complaints that the roof is going to collapse, or you're ordered to shore the roof up, ignore those orders and continue to run coal. Now, I don't know if that's true, but I heard that reported in the media.
Well, there was a memo to that effect. It was true, but the Massey Energy has an explanation for that.
That in my business, if I were in a courtroom trying a case and I had that memo in my briefcase, I would think I had the smoking gun. I would whip that thing out and I would wave it all through the trial, and I would bet you that if there were a jury there, they would look aghast and would be horrified by saying something like that. Because a document like that is essentially saying, if there is a safety issue, produce coal first and maybe we'll worry about the safety issue later. If you have something like that, the only way you can affect the safety problem is to have some oversight agency, some Uber agency, to come in and say, no, you're not allowed to do that, you can't say that, and here's what we're going to do to you because of that. Why don't we do that? Why doesn't MSHA or the Department of Labor do that?
Well, that's their job.
But they don't do it.
Well, there's certainly some serious problems with both federal and state oversight of mine safety. They have enforcement tools that haven't been used or are used ineffectively. And that's very discouraging in the 21st century.
Who has the first responsibility to see that these companies are operating safely?
The company.
Okay. Who has second responsibility?
The company and the people who work in the mines, of course, but
you can have the miners complaining, and you can have the company ignoring or not doing enough, and at some point, some oversight agency is going to come in. Who comes in first?
There is a joint responsibility. States do not have to have, are not required to have mine safety regulatory agencies. Most in the coal fields, I think all of them do, and they operate alongside the federal Mine Safety and Health Administration. Both have jurisdiction.
What kind of authority does the state agency have?
Well, they have similar authority to that possessed by the federal MSHA. They have inspectors. They have their own rules and regulations. That there's some significant parallel between in West Virginia state mine safety regulations and that of the federal MSHA, and the state can enforce state law through a administrative law process and also seek court intervention. There are some criminal sanctions, civil penalties, injunctive relief that are all tools that the state can use, and the same is true of the federal mine safety regime.
Does the state use these tools?
They, at times, have used them.
How bad does it have to get?
It can be a lot better. The state regulatory agency is not funded, and they don't have the staff and the comparable resources to the Federal Mine Safety and Health Administration, in my view.
But MSHA, the Federal Mine Health and Safety Administration, says they're underfunded, they don't have the resources, they don't have the people, they don't have the time, and if the state is less well off than that.
Well, that means we've got to get serious about coal mine health and safety.
But coal mining is one of the major, maybe the major industry in West Virginia.
That's right, and coal miners, they power America. 50% of America's electrical energy comes from coal.
And is going to continue to come from coal.
That's
it's
right.
cheap.
Well, it's cheap. One reason is that the costs are externalized. All of the costs of coal are not internalized into the industry. So the price of coal is cheaper than it probably should be. It would be more expensive if, for example, we were more serious about coal mine health and safety. And in my view, that's worth the cost. However many cents per ton of coal is added to reduce to zero serious injuries and fatalities in our coal mines, it seems to me that that's worth it. But Congress and state legislature have to step up to the plate, and they've got to appropriate adequate funds so that these agencies can operate effectively and enforce the law, so that if there is a culture of non-compliance, a culture of a wink and a nod in a particular company with regard to coal mine health and safety, that's when the government should be coming in, and there ought to be the ability to impose responsibility on those individuals, not just the corporation, but the individuals who attempt to avoid compliance with the law.
Would that include the miners?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for example, one requirement that goes way back is that you're not to bring cigarettes into a coal mine. Makes sense. You know, some people like their cigarettes. And
coal mining is inherently associated with the opening up of methane gas into coal mines. Methane, coal exist simultaneously. You cannot have one without the other. And methane is horrendously explosive.
Well, some mines have more than others,
yes.
But the prohibition of taking cigarettes and smoking in a mine is just common sense.
And coal dust too is explosive.
Exactly. But nevertheless, there are some individuals who they get through the process of mining, and they go down in the mine and they pull out a cigarette and they smoke it and they get away with it. You know, may get away with it for 3 years and then boom. The same thing with these other violations. The other types of violations you find in a mine. It may not be the miner's responsibility, it's the management's responsibility. And you get away with violations. And you have 200 or 300 violations or 500 violations in a year, and the mine doesn't blow up. Well, you know, that's rolling the dice with miners' lives.
Well, we've been talking about a culture of safety in the mine. If you are a safety scofflaw, which is, I think, is one way to describe this, and you get away with it, that reinforces that behavior, and you may do it again, or someone else may see you do it, and it becomes part of the culture.
Absolutely. Deterrence is what we're talking about here. There has to be an effective deterrence. If you have rules and regulations in place that will protect miners' safety and protect miners' lives, And remember that there have been studies that have shown that virtually every coal mine disaster or individual one-by-one deaths of coal miners in the last couple of decades can be linked to violations of mine safety rules. And so when you have those violations, they can kill miners, they can maim miners, and it's not good enough to wait until a mine disaster and then impose responsibility. That simply does not work.
That's the history of the mining industry.
It is indeed the history of the mining industry, and it is often said that mine safety laws are written in the blood of coal miners. And why do they say that? Because after every major mine disaster in this country, let me go back, every major coal mine health and safety law that has been enacted has been in the wake of a major mine disaster. And that's why they say these laws are written in coal miners' blood. But one thing that I've noticed in my research is that whenever there is a mine disaster, there are three things that are said. First, we will have learned from this terrible accident. These miners will not have died in vain. And finally, we've got to ensure that this will never happen again until the next time. And if you look at just in recent history, Sago, the Darby mine in Kentucky, the Aracoma mine fire that killed 2 miners, the Crandall Canyon mine disaster in Utah. And we're hearing the same thing with Upper Big Branch, the same thing. These miners won't have died in vain. We've learned a lesson. And it's the same thing over and over again. And what we need is deterrence. I mean, you can't wait until miners are dead and then enforce the law. You know, those who work in mines and mine management have to know that if they look the other way and allow, for example, ventilation rules to be violated, that there are consequences. And I'd submit that the consequences ought to be personal. And if you have people who have knowingly and intentionally allowed, for example, violations of ventilation requirements, that they ought to be held criminally responsible. What do we do with DUIs to drunk drivers? With zero tolerance. When do we allow a drunk driver? When does a state trooper stop someone driving on I-79 and they give them a breathalyzer and they've got they're twice the limit, and the state trooper says, well, go on, you didn't kill anybody.
But if you have an accident, we're going to come down on you.
Right.
You don't do that.
No.
When do the inspectors come to the mines? How often are these mines looked at?
Well, they're looked at depending on the size of the mine, how big it is geographically, how many workers, so forth. You can have inspectors in the mines virtually every day at some point. But of course, the lack of funding prevents regulatory agencies from being present as much as I suspect they would like.
Do they issue citations for safety problems when they find them?
They issue citations for some. There are critics who say that while they may issue mine safety citations, they miss serious ones. They don't cite the operator. I think that may be true in some circumstances. And the end of the story isn't the citation of a violation. Then there's a whole administrative process which is problematic.
So if an inspector issues a citation, and I guess citations come in various grades, some
Right.
things are not terribly serious,
Right.
or don't appear to be, and some are extremely serious. Are extremely serious violations treated more expediently than the more trivial kinds of violations, if
Well-
there is a trivial safety violation?
Well, I think there are some. Some are, like traffic tickets that we were talking about. They're not drunk driving tickets, but
No.
maybe you have a tail light out.
Well, do they jump on the big ones first and take care of those?
I don't see any evidence of that. There's a process that violations are treated the same way. There's an administrative process. The operator can appeal the violations. In West Virginia, they have a special process for working out violations. The federal government has the independent adjudicatory body of administrative law judges and hearing examiners that are supposed to review company appeals of notices of violation. So there's a whole administrative law framework that allows an operator to appeal these notices of violation, and sometimes it takes years for this to play out.
Wait a minute. If I'm arrested for murdering somebody, I can't say, well, I protest my arrest, and the judge says, okay, go home, and in a couple of years you're going to have a trial. They put me in jail. There may be provisions for me to bond out, but then there are conditions associated with that. Things like you won't kill anybody else, or you won't drive drunk again. They fix the problem, and then they go back and look at what happened to see if I should be punished further, or more severely, or at all. What happens in the mine? They issue a citation and they say, well, we'll convene a panel of judges at some point in the future?
Well, if you listen to operators who are cited, and we've heard that in the wake of the Upper Big Branch disaster, when notice of violation are received, they're fixed the same day. But that's not the issue. The question is, how long have those violations existed, and why is it that it took a federal and state mine inspector to issue formal citations for violations of law? Why weren't those safety problems fixed by the people that work in the mine?
Well, let's look at Upper Big Branch, and I don't profess to be a technical expert. All I know is, as they say, what I read in the papers or see on TV. But if there's a ventilation issue, and if it's a serious ventilation issue, and that would mean that the explosive gases of whatever type are building up in the mine and there is concern about safety, that can't be fixed the same day. That can't be fixed sometimes quickly, easily, or cheaply. But they're not shutting down the mines.
Using your example of ventilation, some ventilation problems can be fixed very easily, and which also shows you that they shouldn't have happened in the first place. Some take more time. There are mine closure orders that are issued with regard to serious violations.
How often does that happen?
That happens not infrequently. It happened at the Upper Big Branch mine, but it's only for a short period of time, and any coal operator resists closing part or all of a mine because that reduces production, and that's a legitimate concern. But if you have a serious safety concern, you ought to follow the law. If there isn't enough air passing through the mine to dilute methane gas or coal dust, then miners ought to be withdrawn, and that ought to be fixed. And that doesn't always happen. That's a problem.
When do these citations get heard?
Well, since the Sago mine disaster and the subsequent fatalities in other coal mines, Congress amended the Federal Mine Safety and Health Act, and MSHA began to issue more citations. And the industry began to appeal them. And in the last 3 years, there's a huge backlog of these appeals of mine safety citations that prevents the Federal Mine Health and Safety Review Commission from moving through them rapidly. I've read something recently that indicated that some of these violations may take a year, 2 years, or even more to be reviewed and a final decision. And then the operator can seek judicial review, can go to court to review. And the setup, the way the Federal Mine Safety and Health Administration has developed a policy that is complex, and it relates to mines that have patterns of violations. One would think that if a particular mine had a pattern of violations, had a number of serious violations, then there would be additional scrutiny, there would be civil penalties, there would be criminal sanctions involved. But the system that's set up through policy, not by regulation, by MSHA, is a complex one. It looks, among other things, at the number of violations in a particular mine that's under scrutiny, and where that mine fits in comparison to the average in the industry.
When does a citation become a violation?
Well, it's one and the same thing.
So if I do it on Monday, that's one. If I do it again on Tuesday, even though one isn't finalized yet, that's two?
That's right. That's two, but not for the process of dealing with flagrant company violators.
So I can violate every day for 365 days, and at the end of the year, I'm not going to be shut down, or I'm not going to be dealt with more harshly because the 365 safety violations have not become finalized.
That's exactly right. And that's a travesty. I noticed I think it was yesterday, that Senator Byrd has been successful in achieving additional appropriations that will allow the Review Commission to wade in and eliminate that backlog.
Well, he had obtained, I think, $22 million to help that. Of course, in federal government language, $22 million buys you a half an hour on the parking meter. It's not a lot of money.
Well, I would hope that Senator Byrd and his staff and members of Congress who've approved these appropriations know what it takes. It doesn't seem like a lot to me, I will admit. But you got to give Senator Byrd credit. His lifelong passion has been mine safety.
Well, and he did it.
And he did it.
No one else has done it. But it just seems like a lot of rhetoric to this point. As you say, these changes are written in the blood of miners, but I can only think of one of these disasters where there might arguably be fair debate about whether something was done wrong, and that was with regard to the Sago disaster, where the claim is, and I don't know what the merits of it are, that it was caused by a lightning strike. You cannot dodge lightning. It's hard to do. I suppose there are some things that would be proposed, but the rest of them, there are real substantive changes, corrections, improvements that could have been made before the disaster that would have at least reduced the probability of them. Yet we just talk. We say, well, we'll have radios to help us find miners after the disaster. We'll have rescue shelters in which the miners can hide after the disaster.
Well, that was the approach after Sago, and that's understandable because of the nature of that tragedy. The miners being trapped for a period of time and basically being asphyxiated. Right. And the thought was that if you get refuge chambers, communications devices, and so forth, that miners who find themselves in a mine with an explosion, for example, may be able to survive. But you're absolutely right. What has to be addressed effectively is the front end, what we were talking about a few moments ago, deterrence, so that we're not looking at dead miners and saying, what can we do? Deterrence means placing responsibility where it belongs, in the mine, on the management, the regulators appreciating this and citing violations, and there be sanctions. An example, the Aracoma mine fire that killed 2 miners 2 weeks after Sago.
Not a disaster. It was only 2 miners.
Not a disaster.
It has to be 3 or
Exactly.
more.
And again, just as an aside, more miners are killed one by one or maybe 2 together than in mine disasters or injured. So we ought not to be just looking at mine disasters engaging the effectiveness of mine safety regulation. But getting back to the Aracoma mine, the company involved in that, the Massey Energy subsidiary, Aracoma, pled guilty to 10 criminal violations, paid civil penalties and criminal penalties that amounted to over $4 million. And yet, we look at the Upper Big Branch mine, and whether or not the violations that the company was cited for caused this explosion, nevertheless, there were a large number of violations, and quite a few of them very serious. So one has to ask, are monetary penalties effective? And I'd suggest that sending those responsible for violations to jail for 2 weeks, like we do with drunk drivers, maybe that'd have an effect, or maybe longer. The penalty, the punishment ought to fit the crime.
Maybe it's time for all of us to get our pitchforks and our torches, go visit our legislators and say it's time to do something. Professor Pat McGinley, thank you very much, Pat, for being with us.
It's my pleasure, Dan.
Thank you also for being with us. On behalf of the LawWorks, I'm Dan Ringer. Good evening. On the LawWorks webpage at thelawworks.org, you'll find a listing of recent The LawWorks show topics and additional information about this show's topic. If you would like to recommend this program to a friend, you'll find video of this program at thelawworks.org, and you can find previous programs on YouTube. If you would like to suggest a topic for a future The LawWorks show, or if you're a school teacher and would like to receive a copy of this program for classroom use, please send us an email to thelawworks@comcast.net.
The LawWorks is produced in cooperation with the West Virginia State Bar, the Mountain State Bar, and the West Virginia University College of Law. The LawWorks is made possible by the generous support of the West Virginia State Bar, the Monongalia County Bar Association, and by a major grant from the West Virginia Bar Foundation, promoting public knowledge of the law in West Virginia. The West Virginia Bar Foundation, the philanthropic organization for West Virginia's legal profession and justice system.
From West Virginia Public Broadcasting.